And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, James Rosebush, who is founder and CEO of For Families, the family wealth and management group for financial services firm Growth Strategy, Inc. He's a former deputy assistant to President Reagan and chief of staff to Nancy Reagan. He's got over 35 years of experience working with wealthy families from around the globe, from all types of issues, as you might imagine, as all of us are dealing with wealthy families on a daily basis. I'm looking forward to his discussion today of where have the leaders gone? And certainly, as we heard from this morning about dealing with politics in Washington, a lot of that has to do with our daily lives. So I want everybody to give Jim a very warm welcome. Jim Rosebush, come on up.
Thanks. Thank you, Greg, and congratulations on yet another successful event. And it's wonderful to see so many friends here today. That's an added plus for me. So I appreciate your inviting me to be here. But I have a confession to make. You know now that I'm a conservative Republican, and I'm proud of that. Are there any other Republicans here? But I have to confess, I underestimated President Barack Obama. He went around the country declaring this would happen because of the sequester and that would happen, but I didn't know he could control the weather to the extent that he was able to bring an enormous, or at least a threat of a huge snowfall in Washington, D.C., which, as you know now, paralyzed the Capitol. And it's not the only thing that paralyzes the Capitol. We're going to be talking about the disappearance of leadership today. I'm going to be sharing a few ideas with you. But that is by way of my explaining why I was not able to be here last night and yesterday afternoon, which I very much wanted to be. So after my third attempt at getting a flight out here, I was met with success, and I got a seat on a plane today. And once I got on, found one seat coming out, there was an empty seat next to me. And I thought, well, God is looking down on me, because as we've all been on jam-packed planes, and when a seat appears next to you, you think you've been blessed in some way. But just as the plane was about to pull off and the door was closing, a very robust, voluptuous young lady came and plunked down in the seat next to me. Well, in the way these things are mixed blessings, as she sat down, she said, "Hi, I'm Romanian. I just started a company in Orange County, and I've just been at a leadership conference." So I said to her, then you're going to write my speech for me, because I'm going to speak about leadership this afternoon. So we went on to talk a little bit about what she had learned at this leadership conference, and I thought it was interesting, and I made a couple notes about it. I asked her what her definition from this conference was of leadership. And she told me a couple of things. She said that a leader is not a boss, but many bosses think they're leaders. A leader does not gain his position through a job, a title, or celebrity, though many think they do. So, what is a leader? I asked her. She said, someone who inspires me to follow them because of their ideals, their principles, and their values, and inspires me to perform to my highest abilities. That's what she learned at her leadership conference, which I thought was interesting. I thought it was also a pretty good summary of a few of the things I want to share with you today. And I'm particularly eager to get to this crowd and talk with all of you today, because I know all of you are thinkers. And more than anything else today, to restore the position of leadership based on principle, the world desperately needs thinkers and people that are supportive of and know the principles that they believe in. So this is something that we're going to explore a little bit today. Now, I have a propensity, and it irritates a lot of people, of going around and asking them, just like I did this young lady, what you think a leader really is. And I did the same to Bill Clinton one time. I asked him the question, what do you think a real leader is? And he said, "Oh, a leader is like a guy who runs a cemetery. You got a lot of people under you, but nobody's listening." But just so you know, I'm a bipartisan guy. I think a lot of Bill Clinton's leadership styles in a lot of different categories. And he went on, in all seriousness, to say that he feels a leader is someone who is able to inspire someone with principle and inspire them to take up leadership based on these principles themselves. So he saw this and he demonstrated leadership in his own way. He also brought out that great leaders also suffer from the fallibility of thinking that they may be great. And this is something that is harmful to their legacy as a leader as well. And it made me think about my experience with Margaret Thatcher. In the beginning, Margaret Thatcher was relatively, I should say, humble person. And I remember attending an official luncheon with President Reagan at number 10 Downing Street one day. And at the end of the lunch, Margaret Thatcher and I happened to be walking down the front stairs, you know, that you can picture in your mind that front door of number 10 Downing Street. It kind of goes down a courtyard. And we got to the bottom of the stairs together. We were chatting on the way down, and we got to the bottom of the stairs, and she turned to me and she said, "Do you think I can get a taxi to go over to the House of Commons?" And I thought, well, you know, why is she asking me this? And I thought afterwards, finally she found a car. Here's a head of state of a major country that moves in motorcades and limousines, and yet she still thought of herself as a person who needed to hail a taxi cab to get to the House of Commons to go to her questions session, which you know can be rigorous and brutal. I also attended with her one of her speeches in her delegation, where she had to go back and be reelected, because in a parliamentary system, as you well know, you had to be repeatedly reelected from your constituency. And that's a very humbling event. And I saw her go back to her roots and to have to profess what she really believed in to the people who originally elected her. It's a way of really keeping you honest. Well, by the time she had finished her, let's say, her reign as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, she really had bought into this idea that she could be immunized from the accountability that makes leaders stay within a believability test of who they really are, what they believe in, and whether people will believe in them. And I knew that was true when, after creating the first Thomas Jefferson Medal for International Diplomacy, we awarded it to Margaret Thatcher one evening at a dinner which was set in the rotunda of Monticello. I don't know, probably many of you have been there, but in Thomas Jefferson's own dining room, all set with candlelight because there's no electricity in that house. And this was a medal being given to Margaret Thatcher as the first recipient of this award. So when she stood up to accept the award, she spent a good hour to an hour and a half comparing herself to Thomas Jefferson in all of his achievements. And I knew at that point, it's not a good idea to compare yourself to Thomas Jefferson. And I knew at that point she had reached a level of lack of realism about who she was as a leader, and that, I think, affected her exit from power and took away from some of the grandeur and the leadership that she brought to a dearly needed economy in Great Britain. I also had a humbling and humiliating experience myself recently. I was advising a board of trustees that were responsible for running a formerly prestigious boarding school in the Midwest. A part of my advisory role, much to my surprise, led to their asking me to take over the school as an interim head of the school before they found a new permanent headmaster. So this had always been on my bucket list. I thought this would be an interesting undertaking. Well, it proved to be the most difficult leadership post I've ever taken on. and it lasted 2 years. It was brutalizing. And I'll tell you, because any of you who have teenagers or have been in education know that teenagers can be brutalizing, and it's what keeps you really honest. Well, one of the most embarrassing moments I had was in my preparation of the first convocation address that I wanted to give. And I thought, because I had turned the school into a leadership academy 2 months before, that I would give my first convocation address on great leaders and great leadership. Well, imagine what happened to me that night in this ivy-covered stained glass window chapel that had been built about 150 years ago with about 200 students. So here I plunge into talking about the great leadership characteristics of Washington and Jefferson and the other founding fathers of our country, and also trying to and attempting to bring us through up into the modern era and exposing what would be great models of leadership for these students. Well, I started out and the audience was rather quiet and restrained, and probably 5 minutes into my talk, there were paper airplanes going through the air. There was talking, there was laughing. I had no idea what was going on. And it was a complete disaster to the point that I had to dismiss all the students. And afterwards, when the seniors came up and kind of consoled me, we discovered that what these students were really not interested in was the leadership models of the past. They wanted to form their own models of leadership as they're progressing through their own generation. And this was another, as I say, it was a humiliating experience for me, but it was an enlightening one. And there are good aspects to this, and there are disturbing aspects to this. And this leads me to basically the core of what I want to share with you today. And that is, I want to share 2 basic principles or observations I have about what has happened to leadership. And then I want to share 4, so those are 2 observations. Then I want to share 4 reasons that I think are behind the demise of leadership, and then 4 examples of leadership from the president that I worked for. So to begin, there are 2 underlying observations that I have about leadership. And the first is, and what's happened to leaders, and where they've evaporated from, where they've gone, and why we lack the kind of leadership that the world so desperately needs today. So observation number 1 is that what I call leadership is the underlying, aggregating, creative, inspiring cohesiveness our civilization needs to advance in some reasonable community or social unity. And because we have an insufficient supply of it today, I predict chaos ahead. And that is the yield sign that is my prediction from today. If you look at politics, if you look at every branch of government, if you look at business, if you look at education, you see what I call VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Especially since 2008, but with the precursors way before 2008, which is what I call the Great Reset, you will see these fundamental actions going on in every single sector of our society. So that is why I believe that the leaders of today, more than anything else, need to be Sherpas. How many of you have been to the Himalayas and trekked? So you know that you have to be completely dependent on and trust with complete confidence the Sherpa that is leading you. And if you don't, you're going to have a misstep, which could be ultimately tragic for you. A Sherpa is someone that you put confidence in to get you to a destination. Where are the Sherpas that we need today? So if we have this, what I call VUCA, across all the sectors of society, what we need are leaders who will lead us through this transition and help explain to us this turmoil and get us through it to a specific goal. You remember the story, there was a movie about the horse whisperer. You remember that? Well, you know, the horse whisperer was a person who listened to the horse first, but remained the leader by gaining the confidence of the horse he led. There's a subtle lesson in that, but ultimately one of the most important. He listened to the horse first, but he never gave up or relinquished his role as the leader. And that's what ultimately led to his success. So I feel that in this first point, we are lacking this kind of Sherpa-like leader and the listening horse whisperer type leader that can guide us through these shoals of ambiguity and complexity and volatility where we are today. Secondly, the more we study leadership, it seems the less we have of it. So if you go on Google, you will find, as I did, there are about 375 unique postings of leadership institutes, leadership associations, leadership centers. Everyone's starting one. Greg, you're probably starting one, right? Everyone wants to have a leadership center. But my question is, it seems that the more we have of this, the less we have of leadership. There's an inverse relationship here. And it's fascinating to me, but even if you look at the freshman class of legislators in Washington that are supposed to be trained in these leadership centers, there's less and less leadership all the time. So those are two critical observations that I've made about this whole area. Why and where have all the leaders gone? So here are the four underlying causes that I've been able to identify, and I'm sure there are many more, and I'd invite you to think of others, and I'd love to talk to you about it after this session as well. But the first one is the ubiquitous availability of unconstrained information. Now, that's sort of a fancy way of saying that today, information is available to every single person in this room, where in the past, it was only available to a privileged few, which put those privileged few in a position of leadership. So, again, the ubiquitous availability of unconstrained information. When I used to write top secret memos in the White House, they always went to and were only read by the intended recipient. Today, if you write a top secret memo in the White House, you'll find it going viral on the internet the next day. So where information is obtained and where it goes has completely changed today. And this has had a direct impact on leadership. A leader used to be someone who had more information than you did, and it gave him power and precedence and a certain degree of respect. Now we don't even need leaders to gain the information that we can use ourselves. Now, everyone has access to just about everything. Your salary, your bonus, what you buy, your divorce settlement. Have you ever looked up a friend's divorce settlement? You can find it on the internet, by the way. It's absolutely fascinating to do that. And the reason I've done it is because in my role of advising families and selecting investment managers, it's a very interesting thing to do, to look up the divorce settlements of the investment managers. Now, I'm probably scaring some of you to death, right? If you look up the divorce settlement of some of the investment managers you're considering hiring, which I would advise you to do, we created something last year called CLASS. It's an annual assessment of a lifestyle survey of investment managers, which is very useful to managers as well as people who are selecting managers. We want to know more about, I'm diverting here a little bit, but we want to know more about the lifestyle of investment managers as well as the quantitative side as well. So you can find out anything that you want. You can say all you want about the importance of the Freedom of Information Act, but its intended consequences may not have been well thought out. You can get information about any kind of government program that and it's your right to do so, and I believe in it, but too much information is like a tsunami of words and information that may in fact drown out the import of the situation. So, as an example, I remember one day I was riding up in the private elevator, the president's private elevator, from the state floor to the family quarters with Nancy Reagan, and the door opened on the family floor, and we were about to step out into the family living room there, and I said, we're going to go dark. And she said, I don't know what you mean. And that was a time when, after a year of being a reviled first lady, she'd been able to turn her image around to being one of the most popular first ladies. And I said, it just dawns on me that if you look at the successful leaders of the past that were exposed to all kinds of things in politics, that the most successful ones that had enduringly positive images were leaders that had a degree of mystery about them. So follow this. So here was Nancy Reagan. She was at that time, she was on the front page of every major newspaper. She was being talked about all over in positive terms, which she was very happy about because she had suffered such negative terms the first year. So why am I saying this? Well, if you look at the Kennedys, for example, if you look at Jacqueline Kennedy, who, very interestingly, as someone told me last week, are you aware of the fact that Jacqueline Kennedy only made 3 speeches while she was First Lady of the United States, and only one of them was in English? The only time she ever spoke to an English language audience formally was when she gave that iconic television tour of the White House, which some of you will be, of my generation, will be old enough to remember. The only other time she spoke publicly was after the Bay of Pigs in Spanish, and when they made that triumphant tour of France, she spoke in French. So what you know about, or what you think you know about Jackie Kennedy is extremely little. You don't know much about her, and yet she remains at the top of the list of one of the top 1 or 2 most favored first ladies in history. But you don't know anything about her. The same thing for her husband. Do you think that the reckless way he conducted himself, not only before he assumed office, but during office, in this day and age of everything being exposed, they wouldn't have been able to write about their administration as having been Camelot? So I said to Nancy Reagan, let's go dark. Let's add a degree of mystery about this. Let's not provide everyone all the kind of information they think they seek. One time we were going to Rome, and we had arranged for the first one-on-one bilateral meeting with the Pope. That was the last Pope. And he wanted to talk to Nancy Reagan about drug abuse. So we set up a meeting. It was the first time a First Lady in history had ever had a bilateral meeting with a Pope. So we planned to fly to Rome, and I remember People magazine had been besieging me. They wanted an exclusive story on Nancy Reagan, and they wanted to follow her on one of her trips, because at that point we were going all over the world on the drug abuse cause. So I reluctantly and mistakenly gave in to having People magazine give us, they could have exclusive coverage going with us to Rome. Well, of course, we laid out certain ground rules and so forth. Well, here was the story that emerged from this trip. It had nothing to do with the substance of her meeting, this historic meeting with the Pope. This is the lead. Nancy Reagan goes to Rome with 35 pieces of luggage, 15 members of staff, 3 hairdressers. This was the People magazine story. So what was really to come of that? That was really what I call today the People magazine-itis culture, people wanting to know too much about their leaders, and when they find out that much, they get disappointed in them. So I think a degree of mystery is really important. But again, we're just focusing on this first point, the overabundance of information available to all of us, which then makes leaders somewhat superfluous. This has had an impact on where have all the leaders gone. The second, the democratization of leadership, which is related to this. Now, everyone is supposed to be a leader. And when everyone is supposed to be a leader, there are no followers. Hence, no cooperation, no coalition building on issues. And when something is posted of value, observation, discovery, or news, everyone feels free to jump in. So blogging, writing, commenting, everyone has a valid point to make. Well, is that really true? Is everyone's position and everyone's point that they're making on Facebook, is it really valid? Again, that takes away from the role of leadership. Does everyone really have to have a voice? When everyone talks, There's no room for a singular voice. These are all things that are working against the whole need for leadership. Now, I know that everyone is supposed to be a leader, and I observed this firsthand when I went as a grandfather to be the guest reader at my grandson's pre-K nursery school. So at 2.5, and yes, I took this book that was called How Animals Talk to Each Other, and it was a big picture book. And so I go into this class with my two wonderful grandsons at age 2.5. They were born the same week. They're called co-bros, cousin brothers. And so they're sitting in this class of about 20 kids. And I'm having the same trouble in this class that I had at that prep school. All the kids are just talking. Well, of course, at 2.5, you get a little more of a break than you do when these kids are in high school. So one of my grandsons says, just to show the distinction in leadership and how early it starts, at 2.5, he says, "Wait a minute, everybody. Pipe down. This is my grandfather." And so much to I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. All the kids quieted down and they listened to the book reading for a while. And then I noticed another style of leadership. My other grandson, who hadn't chimed in with the one who commanded everyone to be quiet, when the kids went out, he had a big smile on his face, and I noticed every kid followed him out. So here are two styles of leadership, but starting at age 2.5. Now, if everyone is supposed to be a leader, and you have the demand on yourself to do it, how are we going to have followers? You have to have leaders, and you have to have followers. The third point, we're in an institutional crisis of confidence. Without an organization to lead, what is a leader called? Look at the drama in Rome, in Greece, in governments the world over. The church, education, youth organizations, companies, many lack respect or adherence from their constituents. Ask anyone, do you like your boss? People don't give you a very positive answer today. Where is the credibility in an organization? This isn't good. We need institutions in society that have, not lack, the confidence of people they lead, to form coalitions, to work together and make progress for the social and economic good. Tearing down can be essential to future growth, but there are needed pillars of society built on strong and trusted and tested foundations. The fourth point, turmoil in fundamental principles and values. I know this sounds terribly negative, but hopefully we'll get to something positive in a minute. Turmoil in fundamental principles and values. Better said, complete lack of fundamental principles. Ask any World War II general how they successfully led their army into battle, and they'll tell you it was by keeping them focused on why they were going to war in the first place. Where are the fundamental principles that we have today to go into war every day, to go into work every day? This erosion of principles and values has an enormous effect on leadership. To know your enemy, you have to know the truth. And to know the truth, you have to be able to discern evil. Otherwise, you become its victim. If nothing is evil, that is, this whole theory and culture about you're not guilty,